Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, part 2 of the subject we started last week, TAEASS401B Plan Assessment Activities and Processes. So tonight we've got 3 topics. They're broken up, or the first 2 are broken up into a couple of subjects themselves, but tonight we're going to look at determining the assessment approach, identifying the candidate, the purpose and context of assessment, the importance of the consultation period when creating assessment tools, and then looking at our legal and ethical requirements. Depending on the timeframes and how that goes, we may actually then look at a completed assessment tool, which encompasses both the student information and the assessor information that all goes together when making an assessment. But we'll look at that a little bit later and we'll see how we go for time in regards to that. So for chapter 1, we're going to look at how to determine the assessment approach and identify the candidates. So in this presentation, we'll overview the first of 3 key elements associated with this topic. We'll investigate how to determine the assessment approach, which is what we're going to start off with right now. As a qualified assessor and trainer, it is obviously very important that as you are charged with the development and creation of assessment tools, that you develop a systematic approach to that process. Needless to say, as part of any assessment process or development. And when it comes to the first step of that, clearly identifying who's going to be assessed or identifying the candidates is so important. We need to learn the learner's characteristics. For those students who have previously done other subjects with us in the driving instructor course, they'll remember as a part of those processes, quite often we had to list, and especially in design develop learning programs, the learner's characteristics. We had to research and ask ourselves, who are we actually teaching? Because again, as someone who's creating an assessment tool, asking ourselves that fundamental question from last week of what does the learner need to learn before we ask ourselves, what are we going to teach? Likewise, we need to know our learners, or we need to know our candidates and what they're made up of and what they're a part of and what they're trying to achieve to be able to then develop a really successful assessment tool. By identifying the candidates from the start, you'll be able to clearly determine the appropriate level of assessment, the types of assessment required, the types of evidence required, and the quality of evidence these candidates should be able to produce as a result of the training, workplace, and life experience. By identifying the candidates and understanding that appropriate level of assessment, it's so important that under that rules of evidence and principles of assessment, as covered last week, that we understand that we don't want to write an assessment that's too easy or at the same time too difficult. We want to match what that assessment asks those students to create, produce, and demonstrate is at that exact level for what they're trying to achieve once they move into the workplace or licensing requirement or potential employment requirement. Likewise, we need to ask ourselves about the types of assessment required. Is it going to be assessment done early in the process? Is it assessment that's going to go across the whole learning process? Or is it something we're going to do at the end? And likewise, are we going to get our candidates to do something? Are we going to get them to create something? Are they going to just write down answers? And what type of answers and what types of quizzes are we going to produce? So that all leads to the types of assessment required, because we're asking ourselves, what's the type of evidence? And again, depending on the level of the qualification or license or job role, that's going to really specify and help us to understand how good that evidence must be. Because again, as we learned from last week or a couple of weeks ago, someone completing a Cert 1 qualification, their evidence will not need to be the same quality as someone doing a Cert 3, Cert 4 or diploma. By identifying the candidate, we are then able to move to the second critical step in determining the assessment approach. After identifying the candidates and taking an in-depth study of their personal professional traits, we are able to confirm the purpose and context of the assessment. So for those, again, for those driving instructors who went through our earlier courses, they'll remember in the design and develop learning programs subject, when identifying that program, we asked you to create a program for a group of refugee migrant students that were going to be taught how to buy a safe car and prepare them for their license test. And a part of that process of identifying the clients, so we knew what countermeasures and what we needed to do to make a fair course with fair assessment, even though we didn't touch the assessment context at that stage within that assessment, but understanding that they were refugees with young people with different maturity levels, with different personal challenges that have come before them, whether or not they've been a part of an educational process or this is their first time engaging in education. Just a tip of the iceberg of some of the things that are really important when trying to understand and put into context the reason why and the need to have a really good understanding of who are these people that are going to undertake this assessment that you're going to create. The confirmation of the purpose and context of the assessment will be in consultation and according to any legal, organisational and ethical requirements. And we're going to look at those as we go through tonight's topics. And obviously it's so important that when we create an assessment, under that principles of assessment and rules of evidence, but especially those principles of assessment of fair, reliable and valid and all that sort of stuff, that we keep on making sure that we tick those boxes so we're legally giving our students every chance to successfully complete a course, that we're making sure that we're doing the right thing by the rules of any RTO or training organisation we're working for, whether it's a TAFE or a private RTO or government department, and likewise that we are always behaving in the most ethical way, because again, you can imagine at any time you're elevated to a position of an assessor, that has great responsibility. It can be easily misconstrued as a bit of a power thing, raised above your participating clients, and it is very easy and open to obviously rorts and other illegal activities. As we identify the candidate, confirm the purposes and context of assessment, including any recognised prior learning process, whilst consulting with relevant people according to legal, organisational and ethical requirements. So again, as we look at why these people are doing this course, or at the end for us, why these people end up participating in this assessment process and using this assessment tool that you've created, obviously in understanding that context, we can then ask ourselves, well, does RPL have a place here? And is there anything that we can use from these people's history or prior learning or work history or current work situation that actually allows for RPL, and we don't start to make people sit assessments that they have no need for? As we go through this course, and again, we touch back to the principles of adult education, you'll soon see that the moment adults, whether they're young adults or older adults, the moment they are engaged in assessment processes where they feel like they already understand it, it's very hard for us as adults not to turn off, not to become disengaged. It's very difficult for us. So for you, the person charged with that responsibility of creating an assessment and understanding its context, it's important that you, again, research this via asking the people who maybe these people work for and looking at any legal ethical requirements, because by being able to create an assessment that is relative to the context, these people will remain engaged. We should be able to simultaneously identify and assess the benchmarks associated to and for the assessment and RPL process, including any specific assessment guidelines. Assessment guidelines can be found in units of competence. It can also be found in the packaging rules for the training package itself. It can be found in any standards or workplace documents or workplace standards. And obviously, as someone creating an assessment, we need to research that and make sure that's in play and in place. We will now investigate those three criteria individually. So prior to conducting an assessment, whether assessing individuals or a group of people, an assessor must identify the candidates or target groups. So as assessors, we must determine who will be assessed. Kind of gone through that already. But again, asking ourselves who they are, professional background, previous educational background, why they're there, what's part of the process. So yeah, next step, why is the assessment necessary? So understanding whether it is a part of just a job or employment pathway to greater growth and promotion, or is it a entry requirement as a part of an industry? Is everyone there because the whole industry has been asked to go back to school and re-qualify? Is it a part of a licensing process? There's obviously lots of different reasons why people need to be assessed, and we're actually going to look at that a little bit later anyway. The context of the assessment, kind of already talked through about that, and how the assessment will be conducted. Is it one-on-one in a room with people sitting at a desk with a clock ticking above their head and pens down and pens up and all that kind of stuff? Is it a well and truly modern type of assessment process where people are kind of doing their job, and as a result of you observing them conduct themselves in their workplace, aligning their work activities to units of competence and the assessment requirements that you can actually kind of sign them off as they go through their daily activities? Yeah, is it going to be structured? Is it going to be practical? Is it going to be theory? Is it going to be a combination of all those? All those things need to be asked before we really start to be able to document that on any type of paper. So when the assessment will take place, again, is it a simulated environment within a course? Is it something that takes place, like I said, early on in their learning, during their learning, after their learning? Is it something that's done within the workplace? Is it just purely timing? The timetable that you write for a course might have clearly within its structure. These are the days we teach this subject, and these are the days we assess them. Again, for those who have done full-time driving instructor courses with us, they'll see that with a lot of our, especially with the 2 on-road units of competence, that the apply safe car driving behaviours and the develop safe car driving behaviours and others, right at the end of the course, we have specific days timetabled for the assessment of those 2 units. We give people the whole course to learn and practice and develop those skills required for that assessment process and that assessment, and we timetable those at the end of the course. What assessment tools will be used? Obviously, again, is an important part of that process. Again, we'll go through an assessment tool hopefully this afternoon or this evening after this presentation, if not on Saturday morning. What procedures will be followed to give feedback? Again, those who have done some training with us before, or anyone who's done any training in training and assessment, will know that there's a whole system to feedback and how we give that, and the importance of constructive feedback. There's nothing worse when you've gone through an assessment process. You're already probably feeling, nervous and vulnerable and all that sort of emotion, to only have an assessor who is unable to give good feedback, effective feedback, and feedback that allows you to, whether you're successful or not, feel like that process has been one of benefit and helping you. So what procedures will be followed to document and record results? Again, that's all a part of the assessment tool that we'll hopefully go through later on. But a good assessment tool tells the assessor what's in play, how we're going to do what we're going to do, and what we do in regards to, once we have those results, how we actually record those, and who should have access to those results as well. Sometimes for employment, there will be a confidentiality where you are training people as a part of their job or as a part of a training strategy for an industry, but those participants, their individual results, will not be shared with their employer. And other times, it'll be an absolute part of that process. Remember, years ago, we ran a course for a TAFE college inside a council, a city of Maribyrnong, I think it was at the time, and we worked with all these different staff across all these different departments, from the garbos to the gardeners to the street sweepers to the guys who climb down pipes. And it was a whole safe driving, safe approach to work course. And some components of their assessments we shared with management, and other components we actually didn't. And that was a part of the legal and organisational requirements to do with the unions and the management and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes you'll go into an industry or into a workplace to conduct some training, but who actually has access to those results will need to be determined beforehand. And you certainly don't tend to want to, or you never want to as a golden rule, tend to share the results of other students with other students. That's just a no-no right from the start. It'll be necessary for the assessor to be very clear about the performance standards required by the candidates, and that can be determined by the industry and by the relevant training packages. And again, that's your unit of competence. When we look at that unit of competence, it tells us what the assessment requirements are. It tells us what evidence must be produced by the students. Likewise, again, if you're in a workplace, you're doing that work, and that workplace says, no, we need these people to be able to use this machine, producing this amount of widgets per hour with 99% accuracy and all that sort of stuff. So you need to be clear about that, so you can therefore clearly label that within your assessment tool. And finally, whether the tools they intend to use are appropriate and will test what they are intended to test. Again, that absolutely goes back to those principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. Valid, reliable assessment and valid, reliable evidence is key to all that, sufficient, all that stuff that allows us to create assessment tools that'll produce the evidence that allows us to determine competence. Remember, we create assessment tools to make our candidates produce evidence that allows us to determine whether they're competent at a job, license, unit of competence, qualification. So whether the tools they will use will collect relevant, valid, and sufficient evidence. I always seem to be almost one slide ahead of myself. Exactly that, the rules of evidence and the principles of assessment. Whether the candidate has been given sufficient, relevant information about the assessment. And again, that's really important. And you'll see tonight, if we do go through an assessment tool tonight, if not Saturday, that in all of our assessment tools, we have instructions to the student and instructions to the assessor. In the versions that you have received from us in the past, in regards to your assessment, you will see the student version of the assessment that just contains the instructions to the student. However, the master version of our assessment will have instructions to the trainer or the assessor, instructions to the assessor, and instructions to the student. So we actually tell the assessor how they're going to conduct this assessment and how they're going to use that assessment tool. And that's really important. We always seem to have a little bit of a problem, and Alex will start to laugh now, but we always seem to have a bit of a problem that a lot of our students will hand in their assessments and will write back saying, hey, you seem to have missed part A, B, and C. And they'll go, oh, I didn't know I had to do that. And sometimes we have to politely remind them that those 6 pages of information you flip past at the start of the assessment just to get to the questions at the end, they were the student instructions telling you every other part of the assessment that you had to achieve in order to be deemed competent. If conducting an assessment in order to issue a nationally accredited qualification, the assessor should validate the assessment tools they have created or intended to use. Validation is actually a process where an assessor or assessors apply a recognised process, checking off their assessment tool against the unit of competence or the licensing standards or the Australian standards or whatever the case may be, for the development and creation of assessment tools. Units of competency, industry work benchmarks, and workplace procedures are just a few of the things that we can validate an assessment against. As it says there in red, in other words, it is a quality assurance process. Validation, though, is a whole separate subject and a unit of competence that we'll actually cover in this assessment cluster for this qualification. Validation is a very important thing. I don't want to go into it too deeply now, but to give you some sort of sense of what validation is, it's when we do validation. You have to do validation all the time. If you're creating a new assessment tool, you'll validate that assessment as a new assessment being created. If you're using an assessment tool, there will be a time period. All assessments normally have either an annual or biannual review date marked on the front of the assessment, where it goes through a bit of a validation review process. And validation pretty much is when we look at the assessment tool And in plain English, we ask ourselves, is it testing what it needs to test? Is it relevant? Is it reliable? Is it fair? Is it producing the evidence we need it to produce? And if all those things come together and we believe that it's fair, reliable, and consistent and still doing its job, we tend to just change the review date for the next one and life goes on. But as obviously industry changes and units of competence change and all that, validation is a really important process. And it's very interesting because validation allows you to really check that that assessment that you've created is doing its job. It's not just the world according to me or the world according to you and what you believe would make a great assessment. Validation is an essential process that allows us to make sure that it ticks all the right boxes. And a part of that is what we call assessment mapping. And like I said, we'll maybe have a look at that tonight, if not definitely on Saturday. So just again, to quickly recap why we assess people for recruitment, for skills recognition, for education and training needs, for employee classification and promotion, for the attainment of qualifications, as a part of assurance of progress through a workplace or through a learning pathway, for language literacy and numeracy, to determine if modification to an educational training program is delivered, licensing and regulatory requirements, just to name a few. I don't think I really need to go through all those again in great detail. If you want me to explain any of those in any detail, please pop your hand up right now. No hands up, so that looks good. So assessors must identify the candidates for assessment and confirm the purposes and context of the assessment. Assessment might be on or off the job, as we've talked about before. It might be conducted as a part of a learning program. It could involve recognised prior learning or recognised current competencies, though RCC is a bit of a funny thing at the moment. We've been through some audits where RCC is very important, and yet at the last audit Alex and I went through, the auditor told us that RCC is a little bit of a figment of imagination, yet we find it written in a lot of places and spaces where people like us need to, or meant to, note it down. So it's an interesting thing. Or a combination of assessment methods. Recognised current competencies is exactly that. It's looking at what you do right now and how that would align to what's required in the assessment and whether or not we can tick you off for that, so to speak, or allow you to shortcut through to the assessment process rather than take on a whole learning process. Chapter 2, guys. Now, Alex and I thought tonight between the chapters, we might give you 5-minute breaks to go get a mouthful of water or whatever the case may be. So maybe because that chapter really didn't last that long, what I might do is just give us a quick 3-minute break. Again, go grab a mouthful of water or something. I know I'm going to do it myself. And that way it actually helps Alex and I as well upload these assessments to you guys a little bit earlier than me rattling on for 90 minutes and then having Alex trying to edit that. So we're going to stop for 3 minutes, guys, and then we'll meet back. Thank you. All right, guys, let's get back into it. Hopefully you're able to run off and get whatever you needed and weren't sitting there going, come on, Cameron, please. We didn't need a break already. So anyway, chapter 2, guys, purpose and context and consultation. It is also necessary to determine the type of assessment required. And what we're going to do here is look at the 3 main approaches to assessment. So first up is formative assessment. Formative assessment takes place over a period of learning or practice. It is a type of continuous or progressive assessment that is conducted as people learn, practice, and embed new skills. Formative assessment assists and supports the learner by advising them about the quality of their performance and their rate of progress towards the achievement of the performance criteria as stated in the competency standard. For you guys right here, right now, the fact with that TAEASS that I said we're going to do a little bit now, and as we go through the course, we're going to keep on going back to that TAEASS, actually is forming or becoming a formative assessment for that first unit of competence. The questions that you did, they were a different type of assessment, which we're going to speak about obviously in a slide or two. But if you kind of think of how we've done a little bit of that TAEASS, but I'm going to keep on making you go through that test as we progress through the whole course, turns that actually into a formative assessment, even though it probably isn't quite designed like that. For most of our students and for most of the subjects you will do with us, we do another type of assessment, which I won't preempt, but formative assessment is that classic assessment that happens across the period of learning. In actual fact, you could virtually say that all the different units of competence that you are going to complete as a part of your learning pathway to the qualification of TAE and all the rest of it. I can't believe I got a mental block down on the code of this course. For that are in the end almost a formative assessment process across the whole qualification. Each one of those little subjects we are participating in and completing across the whole course. And as you keep on completing those assessments across this 12-week period or 16-week period or whatever the case may be, you are formatively showing us and the world that you are becoming a qualified assessor and trainer. Diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment is used to determine education and training needs or to determine why an employee is not performing as well as they should. It is used to map an employee's current performance against expectations or key performance indicators, KPIs as we know them, or to determine where performance gaps lie and how they can be rectified. Again, I hate to always use driver-trainer talk, but a classic case of an informal diagnostic assessment for all the driver trainers that we have on this course is that classic case when a client hops in the car for the first time and we say, hey, how are you going? This is me, you are you. Just before we get started, just let me know what practice have you done? How many driving lessons have you done? If you're a logbook driver, how many hours have you done? Tell me about the types of driving you've done. And then you'll maybe take him out on a quick drive. And you'll say, look, for the first 5 minutes, I'm just going to take you out on the road. I'm going to ask you to turn left and right. I'm just going to watch what you do. And that way I can work out how you drive compared to what it takes to be a good driver, what it takes to be a safe and legal driver, and then probably finally against the drive test criteria. So that's a classic case of a diagnostic assessment. Even an informal conversation, just saying to someone, so tell us about yourself, what have you done in this area, talk to me about your experiences. Even from that, even though that's not a formal assessment process, in actual fact, you're diagnosing what the person knows or what they can do compared to what they need to know and what they need to do. And that's a classic case of a diagnostic assessment. And quite often diagnostic assessment is really important for us because by understanding what someone already knows or what they can already do, we can work out again that important thing. We can then identify what they need to learn. And by understanding what they need to learn, we can then work out what assessments we're going to create that then leads to what we need to do to train them. Summative assessment. Summative assessment occurs at the end of a period of learning or practice. It involves a final assessment procedure that determines whether a unit of competency or performance criteria has been met for the purpose of formal recognition. It is the final test and might consist of a practical demonstration, completion of an assignment or project, role plays or simulations, or whatever the case may be. For us, when you engage in most of our courses have summative assessment. We'll take you through a training process, and at the end of that training process, for you to prove that you have learned and now are competent within the structure or within the elements of performance criteria that we have trained you in, and the required learning and the essential evidence and all that sort of stuff, we will then assess you at the end of that process, and that's why it's known as a summative assessment. A classic case, again, is that first subject. A classic case of that last unit of competence. The questions, we went through that learning process. We went through those 2 webinars, and then we handed you the assessment, and you were able, after participating in that learning pathway of those 2 webinars, were able to then go through and demonstrate your competence in understanding how to use a training package to meet clients' needs by completing that assessment after the learning process. So that was a summative assessment. Whereas within that same assessment, we have this TAEASS, this training and assessment strategy. And in that one, I've said, no, we're going to do a little bit now and a little bit later. And that all of a sudden becomes a formative assessment because it's going to take place across your whole learning pathway. And it's a funny one in that the first subject that we started truly won't be completed till the end of the course. Assessment context must take into consideration the following. One, why the assessment is required. For example, is it to demonstrate competency for a particular competency standard? Classic case of what we do here in courses like this. Is it to identify training needs? Again, that diagnostic assessment. Identifying training needs is an important part of any process in understanding what, again, the student needs to learn, so we understand what we need to assess and train in. Confirm training progress. So again, that formative assessment quite often is really important. As someone goes through that learning process, we keep on assessing along the way because we can confirm that progress. And again, for anyone involved in any form of training, that can be as down to as the informal process of just asking your student or the class, hey, is everyone on the same page as me? Does everyone know where we're at? Could you please, more importantly, could you please tell me again what I've just said? Or if I was to ask you a question right now, can you give me the answer? And you will do that as an assessment and trainer to confirm that training progress. That can be a formal process or an informal process, but it's still a part of actually assessing. For those who have conducted other training with us, they know we really believe in DIDICT, the coaching method and of training. And within DIDICT, there's a lot of open areas for open questions to confirm that training progress, to run non-recognized or non-formal assessment, allowing people to demonstrate and feel confident of their progress through the training. It's to recognize current competencies, to provide informal feedback to the learner on their progress. Again, I seem to always be one slide ahead with the information I'm giving, and to assist the learner in evaluating their own learning. And again, that formative assessment. And that's where, again, DIDICT and a coaching model helps so much, because as you go through that, as you've understood what the student needs to learn, and we coach and train in that method, it allows all these things to take place through an informal assessment process, but it's ticking off all these boxes that we've got here in front of you. And again, it's just why it's so far ahead of any old-fashioned type of instructing. 2, required performance standards. For instance, the competency standard or other benchmark to which the assessment relates, and that's the real formal process, guys, of where we get these units of competence and we validate and we make sure we're training and, well, more importantly, assessing in the areas that we need to assess. And relationships between similar competency standards or units. This could indicate a possibility of clustering units of competency or might affect the order of study sequence for the units of competency. Well, what does that mean? Well, quite often, and especially you'll see in this qualification, there are clusters. We have the assessment cluster, which we're doing right now, which has this subject, which is all about learning how to create and prepare and develop assessment tools. We will then go into a process of learning how to administer those assessments and how to actually conduct assessment. And then we'll have the validate unit where we learn how to validate. So all those units of competency are clustered into this assessment cluster. And that allows Alex and I to design and write assessments according to that and work out, well, in this particular subject, you're already doing parts of this particular subject. So let's not make you do that twice or 3 or 4 times over. Let's remove them from those sections and cluster them. And then we'll write our supporting material in our TAEASS and other things to support that theory or support that process that we've undertaken. Again, for those who can remember back to the driver training course, in the first TAE unit, TAEASS401B, provide work skill instruction. We got you guys to create hour-long delivery and assessment strategies, where you told us how you're going to teach a particular thing, whether it was a 3-point turn or a lane change or whatever. And then for the second part of that TAE unit, the next one, TAEASS402A, we then said, hey, in this subject, even though the assessment is asking you to create 2 or 3 delivery and assessment strategies on a particular subject, stop, don't do it, because you already did it in the last subject. So in all those 3 units of competence, we allowed the evidence created in the first unit to help become the evidence for the second unit, which then those two combined help to create evidence for the third unit. So rather than have you keep on, repeating and doing the same sort of stuff, we said, no, let's do it here. Obviously, we can pick up that evidence and use it in the next assessment, which then allows you to use it in the third assessment. So you get a great all-round education. We get enough evidence and we get enough valid, reliable, and sufficient evidence, but at the same time, we don't create these terrible assessments that are making you go so far beyond and repetitive that we're going to lose you as a student, as in you wanting to be engaged and get the most out of it. Assessment requirements prescribed by the competency standard or the benchmark. Obviously, again, we need to work out that that's being the purpose and context of that. And the assessment guidelines, in some instances, there will be assessment guidelines for the competency standard. So those units of competence, they'll have within their assessment guidelines the bare minimum of evidence that's required and how and the types of evidence we need. And it's the same thing too within some of the licensing standards or Australian standards themselves for different things. There will be a whole section there written that saying that this is how you must do it, this is what you must be able to assess, this is the evidence we need, and you're going to follow that. Consultation and confirmation. It is the responsibility of the assessor and or the registered training organisation to confirm the reasons for assessment and the type of assessment to be conducted. People who should be consulted regarding assessment and with whom the assessment must be confirmed will include the clients, the people paying for you to be there, the company or organisation employing the candidates, and the candidates themselves. And it's so important. Only a few weeks back, I went out and spent half a day, and I think I've already touched with you guys with this, and we do it in lots of different areas, but only the other week I went out and spent half a day with a training manager. Yes, we ran through the TAEASS, and that was the bit that he wasn't really too engaged in. But when I got to the assessment and actually walked him through our assessment, the training manager was rapt as the person who was asking us to, or not the training manager, actually the maintenance manager, who wanted his employers trained and qualified in that area, or qualified and trained in that area. He was rapt to actually sit there and go through the assessment with us. And one of the questions I actually asked him was, within this particular assessment tool, we had about 42 questions. And I said to him, do you think 42 questions is too much? Because I'm thinking maybe it is. Now, funny enough, him as the person employing these people to end up doing that job, he was like, no. I want that amount of questions. I want these guys to be over the top qualified or over the top in their knowledge of this material, so I can have confidence in that I don't need to worry about them doing that job. So from an assessor's point of view, I was a little bit starting to think that within the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence, that we were maybe creating something. But in that industry consultation, in going out there and talking to the client and the people employing the candidates who they're going to put through this course, not only here in Victoria, but up and down Australia, and as he said, he'd like to do it even internationally. It was important that he said, from his perspective, that he had something that was actually a little bit above and beyond what I thought. But that consultation was really important because for him, we need to make him happy. We need to obviously make sure we still abide by all the other rules and principles of assessment. But by making him happy, making sure that that company gets what they want, everyone's a winner. The candidates are important. Sometimes when we run courses and assessment processes for particular groups, like I said, when we did that course for the council workers, that was, like I said, a 2-year process. We were out there for 2 years. We actually went out and met for a whole day, all the candidates, and walked them through what was coming in that course, what it was going to be about. And we actually walked them through the assessments. At that stage, they weren't finalised. And we actually got a little bit of consultation from those guys, just making sure that this seemed to be something that they were keen about and were going to be engaged in and were happy to participate in. And it was a really good process and one that I thoroughly recommend. If you're in that position of designing an assessment and a course for a company, get out there, meet your candidates, have a chat with them and bring them on board. get that buy-in from them. You'll also need to confirm with team leaders, managers, supervisors, and others in the workplace who could be involved in or affected by the assessment or the assessment process. And that's important if you're moving into workplaces and yet these are not students that are coming to a classroom. So important, because these are the people that are probably running the rosters, and anyone who does any type of training within a workplace will tell you it's probably one of the single biggest things that you need to organise and make sure is in effect. I know for us, we do a great deal of first aid training. One of our key companies that we run first aid for is one of the top 10 companies in Australia, one of the biggest builders in Australia, house builders, and we've just put through hundreds of their employees, and obviously Alex and Jess were liaising with their managers and their organisers in getting all those people through those courses at specified dates and times. It wasn't like we could just say these are the days we want to teach. It was a consultative process where they were able to and needed to work with us in obviously organising all those staff members across, it ended up lasting months. We were out there virtually every week or twice a week for months, taking all their staff through those first aid courses. And finally, technical consultation. Sometimes we need to talk to subject experts who are involved in contextualizing or conducting the assessment. So sometimes we get asked to create things or work in things that are outside our wheelhouse. We're not completely sure of the content and we need a little bit of consultation with a technical expert. Alex and I have had a funny process not long ago when we were writing a very, very large course, and we were promised a whole heap of technical support. Maybe it wasn't quite there as much as we wanted, but yeah, when we did get it, it was certainly valuable. So continuing on with consultation and confirmation, occupational health and safety personnel are very important. We can't think that we believe that it'd be really great to have some sort of amazing assessment process in place where the OH&S guy goes, no, you're not doing that. A classic case is we run some heights training, work effectively from heights or safely from heights. And it would be great to be able to put people on top of the Eureka Tower and get them to practice how to work safely from heights. But from an OH&S perspective, that would be a silly thing to do. And sometimes you'll have these great ideas of how the assessment should take place because it's so realistic and it's so right what they're doing in the job. And sometimes you can do that and sometimes you just can't because from a safety point of view, it's just not obtainable or realistic. You'll need to speak to training and assessment coordinators or where relevant, maybe RPL coordinators. So again, you're going into a big workplace, you're offering a course, or a company's going to put all these people through a course. You may need to actually work out, and quite often this will happen, an RPL process. I know when we've done lots of training with the Melbourne or the Metropolitan Fire Brigade, the MFB, or the firefighters, RPL was a very important process for their courses. Every course we've done with the MFB, because they do so much training, they're always looking at seeing how the RPL process can be applied to any new qualification that they do. It seems to be quite paramount in them wanting to uptake any course. And if necessary, industry regulators and industry bodies, ITABs, which have changed now, that's why it's in brackets, they're not really known as ITABs anymore. Very important. Again, if you were to create a course to do or in line with the driver training industry, you might trot off to the Australian Driver Trainers Association of Victoria and ask them and say, hey, we want to speak to someone, a technical expert about something a course we want to run for driving instructors, and you'll probably get Alex Rye's phone number as representatives of ADTAV asking you to work through that, any consultation that you may need from that point of view. Employee and employer representatives, obviously very important. Again, that can be people that are from unions or industry bodies or work focus groups, whatever the case may be, but quite often unions or other legal bodies that represent people in that position, and members of professional associations. All these people can come into contact, or you may need to come into contact with in creating your assessment, making sure that it's a legal assessment, and then it meets all those principles of assessment and rules of evidence. And it's not uncommon for you to chase those people up, because sometimes you will be asked to create things that are outside of your expertise in what you know, but your expertise in creating assessment tools is not undermined as long as you go through that consultation process. It might, in some cases, be necessary to consult with or to notify Commonwealth Department officials, Centrelink personnel, Australian Apprenticeship Centre if you're working with people going through an apprenticeship. Centrelink we sometimes have dealings with, and especially employment agencies. Quite often we have quite a bit to deal with, because people obviously through an employment agency arrangement have chosen to do one of our courses, and then we'll work with those people, informing them of the participation of those people, how they're progressing through their assessments and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes you'll need to do that, like I said, not only in a development stage, but ongoing as the candidates are undertaking your training program, which means they're conducting the assessment and they're participating in the assessment process. Chapter 3, legal and ethical requirements. Again, I bear with me, guys, just for the sake of editing purposes. I'm now going to take a 2-minute break, or 3-minute break again, just to grab a mouthful of water. If you need to run off to the toilet or anything, now's your time. Start running, and I'll meet back with you in a few minutes again, guys, and then we're in the final run home, so to speak. Okay, guys, final chapter, chapter 3, legal and ethical requirements. Assessment processes, methods, tools, and instruments must meet any necessary legal, organisational, and/or ethical requirements. Legal and ethical requirements affecting or impacting on assessment procedures could relate to the RTOs assessment system policies and procedures. And that's important because every RTO has a very large student handbook, normally somewhere online that you can access, which will clearly state their assessment policies and procedures, including everything from the creation of assessments through to students being able to appeal assessment decisions. Most people, as students or participants of a course within any TAFE or RTO, will tend to only understand an RTO's policy or procedure when they're going through maybe an appeals process. However, how that assessment is designed, how it was written, the fact that they're uniform in their look and all that sort of stuff will be a part of the policy and procedure that you, the assessment creator, will need to know and understand. And quite often as a part of the employment process of you starting work with an RTO or a TAFE college will be to read their policies and procedures. And a part of that will be on how to, exit the building in an emergency and all that housekeeping stuff. But one of them should be, and I should say assure you, will be about understanding the RTO's assessment policies and procedures, because that obviously is a quality assurance factor that must be legally met. As an RTO, we need to make sure that all of our staff understand our policies and procedures. So no matter who you as a student get assessed by, no matter what day, week, or who or when, that your ability to demonstrate competence through having a fair assessment process is in play. And our policies and procedures will be what outlines that. AQTF standards for RTOs, in particular the standard for RTO assessments, and that absolutely ties into what I was just saying before. When you go through an audit process to become an RTO, one of the key criteria against the Australian Qualifications Training Framework standards for registered training organisations, AQTF standards for RTOs, is that you will be measured against the RTO or the AQTF standards for assessment as a part of that registration process. Audit requirements, obviously, again, a part of what I was just saying there, and that can be also not only at the registration level, but also as an ongoing audits. Assessment strategy requirements indicated by training packages and units of competency, obviously very important that, again, as we create these assessments and make sure that we're meeting the criteria that it is benchmarked against the training package and the units of competency. Reporting, recording, and retrieval system requirements for assessment, including RPL and RCC. So you'll notice at the bottom of all of our assessments, there'll be a version number, and quite often on our documents, you might even see, though we don't put it as often now, but quite often you'll see, we'll tell people where that document lives. And if you guys can remember back to the TAEASS on Saturday, we actually wrote, and you guys made up one, but in the real one that you looked at, you could actually see where we listed in the TAEASS where our assessments for that course live, so that an auditor or anyone working for us could go in, grab that TAEASS. Today's the day I'm assessing this person in this particular subject. I grab the TAEASS, it tells me, jump online, go to the staff portal. This is where you'll find that assessment. You have a retrieval system. Also, students will know, and you guys will know from even the first assessment, on about the third page, we have the assessment summary sheet, which lets you know all the different steps of the assessment that must be completed. And there's a box there that you can tick. And then on the right-hand side, it has where we can deem that it's been completed or not completed. And at the bottom of that, where we tick whether you're actually competent or not competent. So have you successfully completed those little steps to that assessment, which allows us to deem you as being competent for the whole unit of competence. And you'll notice down the bottom, there'll be a box there saying, has the assessor uploaded this to the staff portal or whatever the case may be. So there'll be instructions down the bottom of that page that actually tells our trainers how to report on the completion of that particular assessment for you, the student. You'll also maybe need to meet legal or ethical requirements due to quality assurance systems relevant to the RTO and to the organisation on whose behalf you're sort of teaching, training, and whatever the case may be. So be sure to consult your learner guide for more examples. And that's true, guys. For those who did the driving instructor course, quite often those learner guides weren't that useful, but for the TAE qualification, those learner guides, even though they're not the easiest of reading, they are really good, and they will further your education beyond what we do in these webinars and in class time. They certainly explore a lot of these topics further than what I'll go to in training them. However, what we try to do is give you this information in easy bite-sized chunks that become relevant to you. Sometimes the learner guides don't do that, but they will further your education and deepen your understanding. So we definitely recommend it. And for those of you who have still got access to the old driver trainer course, definitely go back and look at those 3 TAE learner guides because they are quite useful, actually. They're quite good. RTOs, their staff, and the assessment processes and methods developed must comply with the following Commonwealth legislation. So in actual fact, as assessors and trainers, we are at the very least bound by these 5 legal acts. And I think you would have seen on the TAEASS, if we haven't gone through it yet in the TAEASS, later on in the TAEASS as we go through the course, you'll actually have to list any relevant act that your assessment process may be underpinned by or may be legally bound to follow. So as an absolute minimum, our assessments must comply with the Racial Discrimination Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, the Australian Human Rights Commission Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, and the Age Discrimination Act. I won't really go through those bits of legislation in great detail because I think within their name you can probably understand who they're trying to protect. Obviously, the first one is making sure that we don't create racially discriminative assessments and assessment processes, that if you are of any religion or background, or whatever the case may be, that you could be discriminated against and that you could not successfully complete an assessment because of the way it's written based on your race or beliefs. Obviously, whether you're male or female should not come into whether or not you can be deemed competent in a unit of competence. Obviously, any human rights issues should not be violated as a part of a training and assessment process, or especially any assessment process. Obviously, if people that are able to conduct training and assessment are not disadvantaged by any disability, or your assessment does not deem someone who is more than capable of performing the job or successfully completing the course, and whatever the case may be, that it doesn't discriminate against them due to any disability they may have. And obviously, finally, the Age Discrimination Act, that we don't have an ageist countermeasure built into our assessment or assessment process, discriminating against anyone due to their youth, or quite often in the Age Discrimination Act, their age, how old they actually are in senior years. The different states and territories will also have legislation requiring compliance, and it doesn't. Quite often, that can be a little bit complex and a little bit, not painful, but a little bit exhaustive in trying to determine any particular state legislation that may refer to whatever you're teaching or assessing, or more importantly, assessing. All RTOs must have in place policies and procedures that ensure that the organisation interacts with clients, employees and other stakeholders in a manner that is both legally and ethically acceptable. And again, that'll be that policies and procedures that are found for every RTO. Normally they're listed on any website that the RTO has. They should be publicly accessible. For some RTOs, that means that as you walk in and you go into their front foyer, or whatever the case may be, somewhere on a wall is their policy and procedure manual that you can go and easily access, or by asking the person at the front desk, or whatever the case may be, that they will give you a copy of that. A lot of RTOs will have that electronically lodged somewhere within their website. Policies and procedures must be documented and accessible to employees and the other stakeholders, including auditors. Policies and procedures are grounded in legislation and must be aligned with the organisation's vision and/or mission statement. So all RTOs, whether it's a TAFE or someone as small as ITS, our policies and procedures must link into our original vision and mission statement that we had to create the day we became registered as an RTO, or as part of that RTO process, we had to come up with a vision and mission statement, and our policies and procedures needed to reflect that. Employees must understand and comply with the policies and procedures applicable to the organisation for which they work. I talked about that before. Quite often, as a part of an induction process of your employment or new employment with an RTO, give you a very large induction pack. Within that induction pack will be a whole heap of policies. Those policies and procedures will definitely be their policy and procedure on assessment, including assessment creation, validation, continuous improvement, administration of assessment, how you deem fair and reliable assessment decisions, and how you don't discriminate, and it goes on and on and on and on. But it'll all be there, and you'll have to sign a declaration saying that you have read that and you have understood that. Some RTOs and TAEASS will make you do little questionnaires to prove that you've gone through that process. Others will just have you sign a declaration, but it'll be normally a part of the induction pack as you move into employment with those organisations. In particular, policies, procedures and processes that outline the organisation's expectations with regard to assessment procedures must be identified by assessors and followed when assessments are being planned for and when they are conducted and recorded. I won't really elaborate on that. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's going on about what I've just gone on, but probably in a better way. Organisations delivering training must ensure that their registration is up to date, that they have systems supporting continuous improvement, and that they are considered with the AQTF requirements. And again, as we go through this unit of competence and then the other assessment units, and especially validation, you're going to understand how this continuous improvement and quality assurance come together. And as us as assessors need to constantly be looking at our assessments and understanding where they're at, and then updating them and recording how we've updated those, and how we consult with industry, and we get together with other RTOs and industry, and go through consultation process to make sure again that our assessments are up to date and keep on producing by the units of competence and industry. Because again, there is nothing worse than going through a course that no one values because it doesn't produce what the people want out there in the workforce. Because in the vocational education and training sector, the sector that we live in and we're going to train in, we are training people 99.99% of the time directly linked to an employment outcome. So it's either a part of their employment process or they're going through this to get a job. So we need to make sure that our assessments and the evidence they produce is exactly in line with what's required for industry. Scope of registration indicates the areas in which an RTO and its staff can deliver training, conduct assessment, and award qualifications. Staff must be advised of the organisation's scope and of any changes or updates to the organisation's scope. So remember, I spoke about that a week or two ago, or even on Saturday I spoke about that. The fancy name for what a RTO or TAFE college is allowed to teach and is allowed to assess in and allowed to award qualifications in, we call that our scope of registration. So what an RTO or a TAFE or any approved organisation that delivers training that awards qualifications or nationally recognised qualifications, their scope of registration will have on it listed the qualifications and the units of competence and any skill set or endorsed course or accredited course that they're allowed to legally assess, train and award those all-important certificates for. Scope of registration. Staff must also be aware of any industry code of practice that will impact on their work and on the organisation's operations. They must behave at all times in a professional and ethical manner when interacting with clients and with learners. And obviously, guys, that goes without saying. As a qualified assessor, you can imagine that how easy it would be to elevate yourself to the world of expert or the person who's in power. You have someone or a group of people working and doing things under your auspice in which you obviously clearly have some sort of level of decision making and for want of a better term, power over. And sometimes the wrong type of people become assessors and trainers and they take advantage of that. And I find there is nothing more unpalatable than that. And for our driving trainer students on this course, we'll all know of those Vic Road trainers that should not be, Vic Road testers that should not be Vic Road testers. They don't have the personality for it. They believe that they're so important in what they do, and they believe that the assessment process, that they're the number one person in that process, and they sort of forget that in actual fact our client is the most important person within any assessment process. And that's always so important to remember, not just through that example of Vic Road's testers, but you must always remember that any time as an assessor that you are not the most important person in the process. The most important person in any assessment process is the client, is the student. It's not about you, it's about them. And that's such an important fundamental that you remember as you leave us and move into industry, that you always remember that the assessment process is about your client and not about you. And it can be hard. Assessors have an ethical responsibility to conduct fair and valid assessments. They must therefore conduct assessment validations as needed, document and communicate the agreed approach to assessment, and ensure that they act reasonably and objectively and understand their obligations regarding confidentiality of assessment results. We really did touch on that earlier, so I don't have a burning need to go through that in any greater depth beyond the fact that under the rules of assessment and principles of assessment and rules of evidence, but especially the principles of assessment, that conducting fair, valid and reliable assessments is paramount. And by having everyone understand and agree to the approach and the way that those assessments will be conducted and the evidence that needs to be collected and the sufficient amount of evidence that needs to be collected before you can deem someone to be competent, allows for a fair and equitable result for everyone participating in any course. When designing, developing and utilising assessment tools, contextualising assessments, identifying competency standards and providing for adjustments of assessment methods and tools to accommodate organisational, legal and ethical requirements, plus access and equity issues must be addressed. Whew, that's a big sentence with not much gap. So obviously, again, guys, it's just reminding us that anytime we go to modify any type of assessment through contextualisation, that we understand the standards and everything that underpins that, and that we don't go too far in that contextualization, that we make sure that when we contextualize something, it doesn't all of a sudden fall foul of any of those 5 legal criteria or any other legal criteria that may apply in that industry, in that state, in that city, in that town, in that workplace, to make sure that any other requirements as part of that training package of unit of competence is not compromised to the point that all of a sudden we're not having an assessment process and assessment tool that's producing the right type of or right amount of evidence. Access and equity legislation and principles in VET are put in place to ensure that all people, regardless of gender, socioeconomic background, disability, ethnic origin, age or race, have access to learning, in particular vocational education and training, and that training will be appropriate to the specific needs of previously or particularly disadvantaged people. And that's so important. It's such actually a wonderful little statement that is, because the whole idea of VET, the whole idea of vocational education and training is equity and access, that no matter where you are in the scope of society, if you want to improve yourself, if you want to make your lot better in life, that you can take an educational pathway, which we know underpins, get all philosophical at the moment, if we wanted to, and not get teary-eyed, but philosophical at the least, that an absolute underpinning of our society is that you can improve where you are and what you do, or even your happiness, or whatever the case may be, through an educational pathway that can lead you to, whether it's employment or just for you to be able to become a more wise and better person, or whatever the case may be, that is there for you, and that it does not discriminate against, and it's accessible. One of the great things about funded training, I guess, in some ways, is that those disadvantaged who want to move outside of unemployment and on benefits into an employment situation can do that through affordable, accessible training. Unfortunately, we know that's not as good as what it used to be, because those organisations who have taken advantage of it, not the students, but those running courses, have taken advantage of that model, and it's not quite as good as it used to be. But it's still, in principle, you can, and it's a great thing for anyone, they can improve their lot in life through an educational pathway, through accessible training. And the fact is that they come to us and they have confidence within any assessment process or any assessment tool or any assessment pathway that we have created for them to reach their goals. To comply with access and equity requirements, it might be necessary to make adjustments, reasonable accommodation or allowable adjustments that will allow the assessment candidates with special needs to participate in the assessment process without disadvantage. And one of the easiest and probably most accessible ways to bring that into context is that classic case where someone may not have the greatest reading skills, and for that particular job role, they don't need great reading skills, so they conduct, or writing skills, so they conduct their assessments orally. That you ask them the questions and they tell you the answers. They prove to you that they have a clear understanding of what they need to be assessed in, but rather than write their answers down, you don't disadvantage them. You don't discriminate against them because maybe their LLNN is low, or their literacy skills aren't quite there. But obviously for that job role, for them to do what they want to do and improve their lot in life, that's not a disadvantage, and it doesn't hold them back. So in this presentation, we've explored some of the key information in relation to identifying the client, why it is so important to understand who we're training and why they're there, establishing the context, which is the second bit, meeting our legal and ethical requirements, ensure that you follow up this presentation with any other learning material found on the student portal, and like I said, especially those learner guides, and always feel free to contact us at any stage when required. I will now say thank you for listening. I'll throw open the microphones. I think Alex has a bit of a plan with the assessment, maybe to walk you through the assessment at 8:54. I'm happy to keep on going for a little bit. You probably all want to go home, but if you're happy to, we'll open up some of these assessment tools. I think Alex is going to turn on his mic, and we'll piggyback off each other and just sort of show you the example of two assessments. Funny enough, I think one of the assessments that Alex is going to put up is actually a paid for, professionally produced assessment, and you'll see how, even though you can, when creating courses, you may go down the path of buying pre-existing assessments that are guaranteed to pass audit, and however they are anything but that. So he might be able to bring one of those up, and then we'll probably show you one of ours, and we'll have a look at the difference. But let me confirm that with Alex first. Any questions?
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So guys, as you saw there, if you press *6, or *6, I don't think you guys have got the little icons to turn off your microphone, but you're certainly able to unmute yourself and fire away any questions that you have. Caller 614313. Yeah. Anyway, who's that? Someone unmuted.
Hello?
On the phone. Hello, is that you, John?
Yes.
How are you, buddy?
I've missed a bit of it. Yeah, good yourself? No, that's okay. I just can't see the assessment tool.
No worries. It's not there yet, so that's why you can't see it, buddy. Not a problem.
Okay.
I like the fact that I have the sound of moving traffic behind you, so I have this vision that at 100 k's an hour on the Eastern Freeway, you're looking and watching the webinar while overtaking, changing lanes and doing head checks.
Yeah, that's how you do it, isn't it?
Exactly, spot on. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a professional. Hi, David. You got a question for me?
No, not really.
That's okay. No worries. If you got a question, go for it, guys. Otherwise, I'll get you guys to mute yourselves again so we don't have the background noise. I think Alex will unmute himself now, and he'll probably mute you guys anyway.
All attendees are muted.
Alrighty, Alex, do you want to start off with this one? We're not hearing you, bud.
Alrighty, can you hear me?
Oh, now I can hear you, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, this process all takes a little time. So can everyone see the assessment on screen at the moment?
Thanks, Sarah. Excellent. David?
Diane, fantastic. Thank you. Alrighty, this is actually a professionally purchased assessment tool. So this is one that we purchased, that ITS actually purchased when we were developing the fitness course. We had thoughts of purchasing material and making the job a little easier for ourselves. Then we stumbled across, this is one of the main providers of fitness material for the fitness industry, provide some of the larger fitness organizations with their training materials to become fitness instructors. And yeah, look, we kind of found a few gaping holes in it, basically. So this is an assessment tool. You've all, we'll show you a copy of our assessment tool after this. Let's have a look through it very slowly.
And as we quickly learned that just because people promised a product that is compliant, there is absolutely no guarantee that that comes through. And we just couldn't believe when we first saw this material that as one of the main providers to this industry, we just could not believe, in some ways, to be honest with you, how ordinary this was, let alone the way it looks, but so much, and the formatting issues, but even the fact that it just had, so, as Alex said, so many gaping holes. Back to you, Al.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. You know, you've got to look past the formatting issues on this, because this is a very poorly formatted document for somebody that I believe this document cost us somewhere around about that $400 to $600 mark for this one document. So yeah, keeping the formatting aside, which is another story, we have some pretty big issues with this. Right there, the page that you see in front of you at the moment is the assessor instructions. And you'll notice there are 7 assessor instructions on how to actually conduct this assessment. This assessment is about customer service. It's actually called Provide Quality Service in the Fitness Industry. And straight off the bat, this was where the alarm bell started ringing, where we've got 7 instructions, 7 assessor instructions here on how to actually conduct this assessment.
And our worry is that it doesn't actually provide specific information. It is generic, and it has really nothing to do with what this assessment actually requires. And this is, for want of a better term, the generic crap that auditors have absolute meltdowns over. That this in no way, shape or form, bar the fact that it kind of is, it's a feel-good thing. It kind of tells an assessor what needs to be achieved, but in actual fact, regarding the individual requirements of this assessment, it doesn't go anywhere near it. Back to you, Al.
Well, straight away, what you notice here on the assessor instructions is how long should each of the assessments take? That's missing. What resources do you need to take in the class with you to conduct this assessment? So straight away, just even looking at these 7 items here, you straight away start asking these types of questions and noticing there's not enough information here to actually go in and confidently assess or administer this assessment.
Well, more importantly, under the principles of assessment, how could those instructions to the assessor create, under the principles of assessment, a fair, valid, reliable, sufficient assessment, especially the fairness? How can fairness be administered to that assessment when the rules underpinning it are just so general and so open to interpretation? Go for it, Al.
The next page here, guys, I've actually highlighted all this in pink. Hopefully you can see the color. Can you see the color, Cam?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've highlighted all this in pink because it doesn't need to be in there. This is actually the unit of competence. What that's doing inside an assessment tool is completely beyond me. It's a 39-page assessment. It looks like filler to me, because you've got a unit of competence that tells you this. Why would you add that into the assessment tool?
It's a classic case, guys, where, and it's something that a lot of people do in assessment writing, in order to make themselves look like they know what they're talking about. They'll tend to get the unit of competence and whack it in the assessment tool. And it does not in any way, shape or form create some sort of quality assurance. It doesn't, again, under the rules or the principles of assessment, tick off any of those boxes. And people love putting them in there because, like Alex said, all of a sudden it looks like you're getting this 39-page super assessment, but it's not. It's just all material that just will be taken out anyway in the student version, and it does not help the assessor in any way, shape or form, because what's required in you creating an assessment to meet this criteria is in another part of another document, and it just shouldn't be there. And look at it, as you can see here with Alex, and go for it, Al.
Yeah, so we're 4 pages in at the moment, 5 pages in, there's 6. There's 7 pages into this 39-page assessment that we purchased for, let's say it was $400. I can't remember the exact price. That doesn't need to be there. Page 8, we finally get to some information. Now, as you can see in red here, it says the candidate has been given the following information. So the idea is that, sorry, I've got a printer going on in the background here. The idea is that this is what the student actually should have received in their assessment. We'll actually Cam, will you give this to them on Saturday?
Yeah, I will. I will.
Yeah, because it's not a bad read through to kind of show you how much filler's in it. There's actually a lot of words there, but it actually doesn't say anything. Or nothing of relevance to actually help the student understand what they have to do or how they have to go about completing their assessment.
And because because of that statement in red up the top, what it's trying to say there is that you are meant to sit there with the candidate and read, most likely either one, hand them to that and say, here's 5 minutes of reading time, get your head around that, or you're meant to read that to the student in somehow getting them to understand what's about to take place.
So page 11 here, we've got the assessment agreement between, this is what the students will actually end up signing and declaring that they have done the information they've presented as evidence for this assessment is their own. Cam, can you read that highlighted statement down?
Yeah, I can. It says, yeah, absolutely. I also acknowledge that all material and sources used in the presentation of this assessment, whether they are books, articles, reports, internet searches, or any other document or personal communication.
Yeah, it's. I don't know what that statement's actually doing there.
No, I don't understand. I was waiting for the end bit. There is no end bit.
There's no end bit to that. This is a paid resource, by the way, guys. I have to stress that, right? It makes me laugh. So this is what the learner has to sign as a declaration. And at the top there, you'll notice there are actually 5 assessment tasks there. This is a customer service assessment. Now, for them to actually, what this person has done is he's thrown in every type of assessment method he can think of to actually assess the student or assess the learner to see where they're competent in this in this subject here. Question answers, they have to do an interview, a role play, you get a third-party supervisor report, all for providing customer service. It doesn't actually match to the criteria.
Yeah. And we're talking about a level 2 to 3 subject. So once again, we've got this classic, a bit like the cutting and pasting of the unit of competence. We now have an absolute overplay in, or an over creation of assessment methods trying to justify the existence of the assessment tool itself. So although it'd be great to say, hey, this is so comprehensive that it goes so over the top, that it's so wonderful, it actually screams the complete opposite. It actually screams that, wait a second, here's someone that hasn't really looked at their target audience, hasn't really maybe matched the level, understood and identified who their clients are, to then build an assessment that gives out, once again under the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence, that valid, reliable, sufficient, and especially under validity, that valid evidence that helps deem competence. Once we get to a point where we're trying to do 5 different assessment types for such a low level, we're now starting to get evidence that's no longer valid. It's superfluous.
Exactly, and I think off memory, this unit was only designed to be assessed in 2 or 3 hours. Yet 5 assessment tasks, doing case studies, role plays, conducting interviews, and getting a third-party supervisor to sign off on a report to say that you're fantastic at customer service screams longer than 2 to 3 hours assessing to me. A little bit more purple stuff there. Again, it's a cut and paste from what you saw above in the previous pages. It's actually the same information word for word that was on page 3, I believe, of the assessment task. Then you'll see the student assessment checklist down here. Again, it's the same one that you saw on the previous page, which I just switched back to there. And then we actually get into the assessment task. Now, I've highlighted in yellow here, these are actually the instructions to the student about how to complete the assessment task. Can you read that all right? Or...
Yeah, for sure. You are required to answer all the questions below. This is an open book assessment to be completed under assessment conditions, that is without input from a third person. This to be all your own work. Written responses may be recorded in the space provided or entered in a separate word processing document and attached. You can either bold or highlight the answer or circle if printout in hard copy. You are required to conduct research within your organisation and answer all the questions in this section.
All right, forget the English problems in the statement.
We can even have those sometimes, but yeah. But
we
anyway,
have
go
on. 100% we have those, you know. But again, no information about how long should the assessment take you. Well, is it a 30-minute assessment? Is it a 60-minute assessment? The environment, the due dates, anything, you know, all that important information that students need to know is all missing. You'll see the case study below there is 1 sentence. You're required to conduct research within your organization and answer all of the questions in this section. That's all the information you're given to start with the actual case study itself. Keep in mind there is a case study further down in the other pages, but that's your instructions on how to start.
And what's to say your organisation? What's to say your organisation has nothing to do with customer service within a fitness environment? How does that create evidence that's valid, reliable, fair, and you know all the rest?
Okay, so assessment 3, 4, and 5 isn't much better there, but you guys can read through that on Saturday, I'm sure. Now, what you're seeing here, guys, is the actual assessment tool itself. This is what was presented. This is apparently ready for us. Take away the yellow lines. The yellow lines are what they call the model answers or the correct answers. The idea is that an assessor would remove the yellow in that section there and then submit that piece of paper to the student to actually conduct the assessment. Some of the big gaping holes you're going to see in here straight away is the fact that there is nowhere for the student to write down their name. Sounds simple, but that actually will fail audit straight off the bat. Second of all, there's nowhere for the assessor to correct the question. And as you read through some of the questions, you'll actually realize that they don't make a lot of sense. Again, this is a common problem we all share as an RTO. We all have questions that might need to be reworded every now and then, but yeah, it gets pretty serious.
In actual fact, Alex, Sarah, thank you, Sarah. For the last 3 months or 4 months, I keep on crying when I think about these assessments. In the left-hand side there, Alex, you'll notice that Sarah has actually finally provided us with why this assessment has now become value for money. And as she says there, I think your initial $400 investment in this document was well worth it as a future teaching tool for students like us as what not to do. So in actual fact, but this has turned into gold because we couldn't have created this. So it's
yeah, very, very, very good point.
Thanks, Sarah. I can now sleep tonight. It was bringing up sweat. It was bringing up sweat, just bringing this back up on screen.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, that $400 is still burning me. So it's
exactly spot on.
And then it goes on. So I won't go through every page. Again, the red here, he changes formats here a little bit. The red now is the model answers or the suggested responses by the student. So yeah, a little bit of inconsistency there. Again, something that can be overlooked, but something that if you're developing an assessment tool for an RTO or for yourself, or if you want to use this qualification to get into developing assessment tools, look at this guy, $400 for this one. You know, consistency is quite important. As we go through, I won't scan through. I won't go through page by page and all this type of stuff. It's pretty much more of the same stuff.
And again, guys, you saw all that work, and it's good to be, like I said, to hopefully be, make sure you're following the rules of evidence. But that amount of evidence for this unit, with all the other things that's going on and still to come, is not in line with understanding your clients and understanding the need of these people in the workplace. Go for it,
Al. Yeah, so just again, going through it, you'll notice here that this is the assessor checklist here. Again, we'll go through that. I think, Cam, you'll go through that on Saturday anyway.
Yeah, I'll go through it on Saturday with one of ours to highlight the difference.
Yeah, the key to developing an assessment, guys, is to really spell it out, to segment it, keep it in order, and just provide detail. Really, that's pretty much the key to a good assessment or to good learning material or to anything you do in this industry is just don't cut corners. Provide as much detail as you can. Yes, it takes a little bit more time on this end of the scale, but the result is better. The result will give you a better result at the end.
It's really like, guys, asking, what the assessor wants to do, what you want the applicant to be able to do, and then really listing that step by step and having that level of detail, because it's only then can you create a reliable assessment. The whole idea of a good assessment tool is, regardless of who picks that up on any particular morning or afternoon, to conduct that assessment on any student, no matter who they are and where they're from, that the same results will apply. Someone who deserves to pass will pass. Someone who is not competent will not get through, and that the assessment, no matter who's doing it and who's administrating it, the evidence that it causes that student to produce will meet all those legal and ethical requirements. Go for it, Al. I'll let you finish off.
All I was going to say is, you see the last 3 pages are the unit of competence again. So just more filler on the last 3 pages there. Cam, I'm just going to put up the other slide right now.
Yep.
Just bear with me, guys, while I get the other one. All right. And this is one of our assessment tools. What you'll notice here with our assessment tool, we try to keep a very consistent format all the way through it as we go through. Front page spells it out very simple. The only part of the unit of competence that we have incorporated into the actual assessment tool is this box here, which explains what the assessment tool is about and who's it for. That's the only part that we've actually incorporated. This is what we call a master assessment tool. So this is the part of the assessment that you normally won't see. And this is the general assessor instructions. Now, basically, this is just an overview of how to conduct the entire assessment. So you'll see the headings here. Again, I won't run through the information. You can run through them yourself. But we've got here before conducting the assessment. And we've got a whole bunch of information here about what the assessor should do before actually physically commencing with the assessment, including contact telephone numbers of Cameron and the senior trainer in case there's any part of this assessment they actually don't understand. Conducting the assessment, a set of general instructions of how to conduct the assessment, making the decision, and after the assessment. So again, instructions all the way through.
So remember that little box with 7 steps in it, which contain 1 or 2 lines? This is our version of that, let alone the specific instructions. This is just the general stuff that underpins fair, reliable, valid assessment that we're saying to anyone who works with us. This is the absolute minimum to which this assessment must be conducted before we even get into the specific requirements of the actual different steps within the assessment. But this ensures that everyone is at the same benchmark. So you as a student or any of our students have that fair, reliable assessment process.
Then to keep consistency with all our assessments, we've got a document format policy. Basically says anything in blue, text boxes in blue, titles or subtitles that are in blue is meant to be given to the student. Anything in green is meant to be given to the assessor. So a bit of a color coordinated approach to make it really easy to understand, to distinguish which part belongs to the student, which part belongs to the assessor. And
not to blow, I've just blacked out, so I don't know if my voice, my microphone went there. Not to blow our own trumpet or whatever, but always that part there on audits makes me a very proud person in regards to what Alex does in creating these assessments. Always auditors say, thank God someone has finally worked out to put some sort of process in place that separates what the information is for the assessors and what the information is for the students. Back to you, Al.
Assessment cover sheet, very simple, has the results of the student on there, has assessor comments and basically the details of the student at the top here. It's all blanked out in white, guys. That's because it's a PDF and this program doesn't actually convert PDF very well. But you'll see the original on Saturday. Then we have a student comment section where the student can make any comments officially on record and then sign the declaration, and then the assessor signs that they have administered a valid, fair, reliable assessment. Next step, we go into blue, which is general information or overview of the assessment itself. Basically gives them instructions, what to expect in the written component, what to expect in the practical component, and some conditions of the assessment. Things like referencing, making sure that the work belongs to them, that type of stuff, time frames, or all those weird and wonderful things. Grounds for stopping the assessment, why we would actually stop an assessment, reasonable adjustment, late submissions, and again, achieving a satisfactory outcome. We actually spell it out there of, a little bit of a checklist of what you need to actually submit in order to actually get a satisfactory outcome for this assessment. So there's nothing ambiguous, there's nothing confusing about what you need to do to actually pass the assessment. Then we move on to assessment task 1, which is the written instructions. And basically these are the instructions here that the student needs to read through in order to complete assessment task 1. You'll notice that it has timing in there. So this assessment task will take only 60 minutes to complete. They need to ensure they have, number 1 here, ensure you have a copy of the Australian Standards with you before attempting the task.
So it totally prepares you for that process so that you don't turn up disadvantaged for not knowing what was required before you turned up to be a part of this assessment.
It even says here, in particular, you'll be assessing your ability to demonstrate knowledge of, and it's got the 3 things that this assessment, the task 1, actually will focus on. And then you can see here, achieving a satisfactory outcome. We've got the dot points here. You need to complete all the questions. You need to demonstrate sufficient knowledge of the subject, use reasonable methods or considerations in coming up with your answers, and correctly explain principles when questioned by your assessor in the instance where your original reply is unclear. So spell it out there. The next page is in green, which this is the information for the assessor, and this does the same thing, and it spells out how the assessor should administer this assessment task, how much time they should allow students, how they should set up the room, if that's a consideration. You can see here there's a little bit more information about making the decision. We've basically said we've got model answers to each of the questions we're going to ask. However, it does actually say somewhere in there, and I apologize, the writing's a bit small on this end of the screen here, but it actually does say in there that not just to rely on those model answers or those suggested answers, but to use their own professional opinion and experience in the industry to come up with the answer or determine competency. And then again, reiterating what needs to be submitted in order to be a satisfactory outcome, to achieve a satisfactory outcome.
So within assessment task 1, so within assessment task 1, you can clearly see already, guys, that the student, the client, has a very clear understanding of what's about to take place. But more importantly for them, even from the student's perspective, even though they won't see that section in green, because our trainer and our assessor has been given such a clear, concise roadmap to follow, we're ensuring that our student is going to participate in a fair, reliable assessment process that's free of discrimination and all those above and all those legal and ethical requirements that we must consider when we're creating these assessment tools.
So the next couple of pages, guys, is just all the actual questions laid out in a very simple format. Again, we've used the same highlighting approach, which most RTOs use to determine which answer is correct, in this. Yep.
Sorry, go for it. But I was just going to say how, though, we've got an area where the trainers can mark for each individual answer, whether it's been deemed correct or not, on the right-hand side in the boxes. Yep.
Right-hand side in the boxes. Goes through all the different questions. And then at the end, we move on to assessment task 2. Same format. Same thing again, instructions for the student. Then we've got instructions for the assessor. This is a practical assessment, as you can see there. In the practical assessment, we've also provided scenarios or an example of a scenario for the role play, or not for the role play, but for the observation that they have to perform. You'll see here that we've got the list of resources at the bottom here to say, well, these are all the resources that you'll need in order to conduct this assessment, and it goes on and on and on through that. Personnel, the types of people you will need in order to conduct this assessment. And then we actually commence with the assessment itself. And again, this is a checklist for you. Have a better view of this on Saturday when Cameron goes through or provides you with a copy of the assessment tool anyway.
But clearly defined, guys, on what needs to be found and what is deemed to be okay. Even the fact here that it highlights the check that the exterior of the fixture. So we're actually reminding the assessor of what they must be looking for. It's very clear. Cool.
Yep, exactly. Little notes, very fine detail. Everything is broken up into fine detail of what needs to be done to perform that task. So we're actually assessing every step of the task is what we're actually doing.
And that's really important, guys. Quite often in checklists, they become very broad. It'll say something like, did the student start the car correctly? And what it should have said was, it should have measured, did the student choose the right key? Did the student put the key in the right way? Did they there's so many steps to that if we're going to do a checklist, that they are checklist off. It's so easy just to become very generic in checklisting, but the auditors hate it, and they tend to, hit hard on that, because a bit like that last assessment, the checklist information was very, very generic, and that is open then to interpretation, and important steps can be skipped. But if the end result kind of looks right, you can deem someone competent, even though, like in here, we have all these little individual steps marked out, which ensures consistency in evidence and performance, which allows you to more fairly and consistently have the correct answer in whether or not this person's demonstrating competence.
Effectively, it's got to be measurable. You've got to be able to measure
on.
and see the student perform the task. If the criteria you're adding into your assessment isn't measurable, and it's vague and it doesn't, then basically it won't pass an audit. So you can actually see here, we want the student to clean and white. We want the student to install something else, and it's step-by-step procedure on how to pull. In this case, this is a fire extinguisher course, so it's about pulling the fire extinguisher apart and how to reinstall the components on it.
Good. I was just reading one of John's questions, but I'll go through that later. Cool.
And that's it, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So again, the great thing for us guys, this assessment tool is quite complex, because it's actually assessing someone against an Australian standard. And Australian standards do not or are not written in a particular way to make it an easy process. Australian standards are there to create minimum requirements in every step of that. So that assessment's meeting two key criteria, a unit of competence and also an Australian standard. The assessments that we're going to be creating, because we're working out of those more simplified training packages at level 1 or skill sets or whatever the case may be, you'll see that although we want a lot of that detail in there, and we're going to create that together, and you guys will have enough ideas of how to do that, we're not having to assess something quite so complex as what that particular unit of competence wants and that particular qualification wants, because that is a combination of a theory and practical exercise that is meeting an Australian standard, an important Australian standard to do with fire extinguishers.
Again, I should probably point out, it does appear to be complex, but at the end of the day, it's just a task that we've broken down into its individual steps and we put it on paper.
Yeah, spot on. And we have a plan and a template in place that allows you to do that.
That's it.
All righty. All right, guys. Well, I think for that, we can bid you all a good night and thank you for listening. Any questions beyond that? I'm not quite sure of your question, John.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
Oh, Julie? What do we think our assessment is working? Yeah. Look, it's funny. It is really important that if you were to create any assessment tool that you hope to go on and sell, that you keep on asking yourself, is this something that someone can pick up and use straight away? Because quite often it's convenience that they're buying. They're buying that ability to be compliant with audit, and they're buying that convenience, because sometimes a really good assessment, as you can see there, sometimes those assessments can take a week to write, let alone a few hours, depending on the subject. But with that, guys, like I said, I'll give you a couple other seconds to ask any more questions. But beyond that, we'll bid you good night. Julie, just in relation to your particular question about refund, quite often the people that produce these assessments don't have a refund policy. They'll say that as a part of that process, you purchase that and you take it on board. They kind of give you a bit of a sample to look at, which normally is very hard to be able to determine. But yeah, you go ahead and buy it, and then yeah, you're stuck with it in some ways. Great week, and I'll see you Saturday. See you 9 o'clock Saturday morning, bright and early, when you all come into class so fresh-faced and enthusiastic. Thanks, guys.